All right. Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be going over our next component of the class. We're going to be going over some of the extension off the Italy and Germany on how they unified as one country. We've done a web quest the past couple days, so hopefully this part of it will kind of help you clarify some things. So anyway, without further ado, you should have guided notes. Follow along the guided notes with you. We're going to fly through this first part. All right. So, anyways, nationalism. What is nationalism? Nationalism is where your belief and your loyalty is to your own. It's not to a king. It's not to a queen or an empire, but it's to the people of the nation who share a very common interest, a common culture, a common history. It could be language. It could be religion. But it's basically who makes you who you are. So Polish, or if you're Ukrainian, or if you're Russian, there's certain characteristics that make you those things. So the idea is with nationalism that you want unity amongst your ethnic group to kind of join together. And especially this is kind of what started happening in Europe all throughout the 1800s, as we've talked about, and we'll talk about more here in a minute. But usually see rise of nationalism in, like, I guess modern day examples would be like the Olympics. You see people painted their faces all in their country's flags, wearing patriotic colors, showcasing that. All right. So, what makes bonds? What makes nationalism? What are some things that link people or link cultures? These are some examples. Obviously, your nationality, your same common ancestry, language, your culture, your food, dress, behavior, as you see on the slide here. You share a common history with people, share religion with a very similar group of people, as well as your territory and land. So these are things that link people together and what makes them nationalistic, by sharing these traits and sharing these ideas. All right. So going back to one of the questions yesterday on the web quest was the Congress of Vienna. Now I know we talked about this under Napoleon, but just wanted to kind of go back on it again because this is kind of what will start the nationalistic movement. So again, review. Going back with the Congress of Vienna, Prince von Metternich, he was like the architect of this Congress after Napoleon was defeated. The main point of this Congress was to weaken France and to balance the power out. You don't want France being the only power. You wanted to make Great Britain, France, Russia, Prussia, Austria, all five of those would be like the five big powers that all share responsibilities within Europe. Another big part of the goal was to restore the old monarchies that Napoleon once defeated. So restore those names. And then here was the biggest problem that we'll talk more about, I guess more connection for this class, was the fact that the people that were at the Congress of Vienna, they carved up and redrew the boundaries of Europe and didn't take into account the different ethnic groups, nationalities that were in Europe at the time. So, for instance, if you were Polish or if you were Czech or you're Croatian, they basically just tossed all these groups into the different empires. For instance, those countries I just mentioned were tossed into the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. If you were a Czech or you were Hungarian or you were a Polish or you were Italian, you had nothing in common with your leader. And that was a major, major problem. You were being controlled by somebody else that was different than you. So that led to these groups, as you guys see at the bottom of the screen, Croats, Czechs, Germans, Italians, Poles, Serbs, Slovaks, that began to push for these independent movements. And ultimately, spoiler alert, nationalism is going to be one of the causes of World War I. You have a bunch of different groups vying for power, causing chaos, and yeah, it turned into a powder keg of violence and turmoil. All right, so kind of going through some of the nationalist movements in Germany and Italy. Start off with Italy first. So this picture kind of shows you guys, some of the different kingdoms that Italy was divided up into. And Italy wasn't the same after the great Roman Empire that you guys learned about way back in probably seventh grade. That was really the last time they were really unified. After the fall of the Roman Empire, they basically were split up by the different European global powers. And especially after the Congress of Vienna, they divided up Italy into these different, as you guys see the map, these different kingdoms. You have Austria had a piece, Spanish Bourbon Empire had a piece, the Pope had the Papal States. The Papal States were made by the Pope. And throughout this whole process, you had, as you guys saw yesterday with Mazzini in the reading, you had artists and you had writers, you had composition people, you had song leaders, you had all these different groups of people in Italy that kept their heritage intact. They were celebrating Italian culture, although they're being controlled by somebody else. So on this map, all the people that you see, all these different kingdoms, they all were Italian, but they were controlled by somebody different. Going back to my example the other day, with in a country or in anything that you do with a group, you're more powerful when you're one, when you're bonded. Well, these big powers didn't want the Italian people to be bonded. They wanted to keep them separated, to keep them weak. So that's a big part of that. And in that whole process, you start seeing these movements, as I said, where Italian people began to realize that and began their nationalistic movement in all these different provinces that wanted to be unified. All right, so today we're bringing over these three leaders that had a profound effect in leading Italy to their unification. So notice at the bottom of the screen you have Mazzini was the heart. He was the heart and soul of the operation of the unification movement. Garibaldi was more like the muscle, the warrior, and Cavour was more the brains of the operation. And all three of these men had, again, profound effects in the unification process. All right, so start with Mazzini. He was a writer. That's where a lot of you guys missed yesterday with this. It's important in what organizations that they create or are a part of. So the nationalistic group in Italy was called Young Italy. It was created by Mazzini. He was a writer. So having the power of the pen, you have the power to write, shape policy. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to use the newspaper, use his thing to create his ideas and to spread his ideas of nationalism. So ultimately, his goals are to end foreign rule. He wants to redraw the boundaries again that was set by the Congress of Vienna, and he wants to unify the Italian states all together, going from all these different kingdoms, different states, to boom, all together as one. So in 1848, the rebellions were occurring all throughout the 40s, and former rulers of Italian states drove Mazzini and other nationalist leaders into exile. He had basically the choice: either going to be arrested or they have to leave. And he chooses to leave, and while he's away, he keeps the nationalistic movement alive by spreading and smuggling in pamphlets of his writings, and that spreads amongst the Italian people. Cavour was the brain of the independence movement. He was the prime minister of one of the kingdoms, Piedmont, Sardinia, throughout Italy. Again, he very similar to the last one is that he founded a nationalistic newspaper. He believed that a good economy would help unite the country. He believed that if people were working and doing good economically, that would help matters in the unification process. And he decides to build an alliance with France. He believed with that alliance, it would unify the North. It would help them defeat Austria, which was like their big main competitor. And France didn't like Austria. They didn't like Austria, so they basically teamed up, and that was part of his idea. Again, he was the brains. He knew 2 against 1. That's better for him. And then Garibaldi. Garibaldi was the heart. He was the warrior. He was exiled twice for his nationalistic beliefs. He spent some time in South America where he learned some guerrilla tactics. And when he came back to Italy to rejoin these nationalist movements, he implemented some of the things that he learned, such as guerrilla warfare. The group of men that was his followers was known as the Red Shirts, and they used a lot of these guerrilla tactics to really hurt Austria and some of these other foreign powers that really kind of crippled them. But ultimately, a lot of these battles that he's going to lead, he's going to win. So a lot of these battles that they win will help unify the North and the South. That will eventually lead to that movement. So some challenges so once Italy was unified, okay, now what? Well, now you have 2 different parts of Italy. You have the North and the South that were very different. The North was industrialized, the South was not. You have 2 different Italian group of people that have very different needs and wants. So that led to some challenges amongst the government. They also formed an alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Germany. Keep this in mind for World War I. We'll talk about this much later on. But they formed an alliance there basically to help protect each other. Poverty was an issue. So this is also the time period, late 1800s, where a lot of Italian people leave Italy to come to America. Millions of immigrants because of the huge poverty issue, poverty problem. And there were still some problems with lack of unity. There's still some strong differences that were created by foreign powers that they had to get over. All right, now going into Germany. Germany. So again, you see this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but there were 39 German states, as you guys see in the map here. Very similar to Italy. They were broken into different kingdoms by the Congress of Vienna. Austria and Prussia dominated the Confederation, and this is here you have it. All of the different components and parts. So Prussia is in blue here, as you guys can see, the dark blue, and those are also split up into different states and kingdoms. So Prussian advantages. Prussia was mostly composed of German people. They were the most powerful army in Europe. They were emerging. They were more of a younger country. They were very much industrialized. So when Great Britain industrialized, they weren't very far behind. Many of their ideas in Britain kind of leaked to Prussia, and they became a very, very industrialized nation, very, very powerful, with a big, big, big military. They were also rich in natural resources, which is what you need in order to industrialize. So the Rhineland is a very key part of Germany, which is very industrial rich, that will allow them the fuel and resources that they need. So yeah. 1848, democratic revolutions broke out all over Europe. So as a result, Prussia created by a liberal constitution to limit the power of the king. But they also took that as their time to start revolting as well. Because the rest of the Europeans were doing it. They figured, well, heck, now's a good time to do it as well. Let's start revolting, just like the rest of the European countries are doing. All right, so a couple key figures. King Wilhelm, he was the king of Prussia. Who succeeded is not really that important. Ultimately, he was supported by the wealthy land owning class, strongly conservative, opposed liberal ideas, very traditional, didn't like change, and he's gonna be the one who's going to appoint Bismarck. We'll get to here in a minute. But anyway, William I also wanted to increase the size and strength of the military. Parliament will refuse that power to him. However, he decided to pick a new prime minister in order to get what he wanted. And he will get what he wanted by placing this guy, Otto von Bismarck. He's conservative, just like Wilhelm is. As I said, became prime minister. He led Prussia in unification of Germany through war, and he believed it was the duty of the king to lead the Prussian people to independence. Bismarck, he believed in his policy. This is one of your WebQuest questions. A lot of you guys didn't get right. It was there. I don't know if you just kind of glossed over it. But one of his philosophies is realpolitik. Realpolitik means it's politics of reality, being practical, protect your own interest, do what's best for your country. So an example of that would be, I don't know, back in the 70s, Richard Nixon hated the Soviet Union. It was still the Cold War, but he passed policies with the Soviet Union. They agreed to limit nuclear weapons. So although we hated them, it was in our best interest to make a deal with them to limit nuclear weapons. Common sense. Make the world safer. Although we hated them. So kind of putting our pride aside. There's many examples of that. So again, you're just trying to use common sense approaches to do what's best for your country. And he knew the only way for German independence was going to be through the military, through blood. Let's keep that in mind for the next slide. So he believed that the only way for independence amongst the German people were iron and blood, by war. So going back to Wilhelm, he believed that he wanted to expand his military. That's why he hired Bismarck. Bismarck had the influence and power. He basically ignored what the parliament did, and he raised the taxes. He increased the military. Why? Because he knew, again, realpolitik, he knew that was the only venture that he needed to gain independence was through the military. So he built up the army. He asked for more taxes. He collected them anyway, and he used that to unite Germany. All right. Last part, steps to unify, 1864, alliance between Prussia and Austria. Actually, you know what? We'll stop here because we only got about a minute left in this web quest. I'll make a new video here in a minute.